Dear guests, good morning, and welcome to the next day of Dayton Dialogue. I invite you to take your seats for the first Dayton Dialogue panel of the day, NATO's Spotlight on Veterans, sponsored by the German Marshall Fund. And I'll note that there is no reserved seating this morning, so I encourage all of you, if you'd like, to come on up, join us in the front rows, and look forward to your questions during the dialogue. With that, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage our speakers for this discussion, moderated by Christine Berzina, Managing Director at GMF. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Sunday morning of Memorial Day weekend to talk about something that is so important in the NATO relationship. My name is Christine Berzina. I'm a managing director at the German Marshall Fund. If you haven't heard of us, we're a transatlantic think tank, an institution with headquarters in Washington, D.C., and 7 offices across Europe. The focus on the depth of the transatlantic relationship is what we're all about. Here, this weekend, we're going to be talking about NATO. But when we at GMF think about NATO, it's not only the North Atlantic Treaty, although of course it is. It's not just about Article 5 and the other articles and what it means and what do you do? Of course it is, and how does that evolve? But for us, it's also about the people and the communities who stand behind that treaty, who are served by that treaty, and whose work makes that treaty not simply a piece of paper, but something vibrant that is more than words on a page, but instead is about peace, stability, prosperity, and the values that underlie NATO. And a really important angle on the NATO piece is the question of service. And we have a panel today of veterans from 2 NATO countries, from both sides of the Atlantic, whose work, whose careers bridge both military service as well as the world of policy and the transformation and the creation of peace and stability in the global arena. NATO, it isn't just about friends, it isn't just about pieces of paper, but it's about family. It's about tens and hundreds of thousands of service members who serve together side by side, from the Cold War, when we had nearly 500,000 American service members in Europe, through to the 21st century, when Article 5 was invoked in the only time to help the United States after 9/11, to today, when again there are large threats on the horizon, and even on the European continent with the war in Ukraine. So really, this is not about the past, and it's not just about paper, but about where we are today. So with that, I want to introduce you to our amazing panel. We are going to start furthest on the left. Jarno Limnell, Major Jarno Limnell, is a member of the Finnish Parliament, a member of the Defense Committee. And Finland is incredibly important because it is one of the newest members of the NATO alliance, joining in 2023 after the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that's also the year that you joined the Parliament, 2023.
Exactly.
We'll go to Jarno in a moment. Then to my left, we have Colonel Robbie Robinson. Sorry, yes, to my right.
Yeah.
Colonel Robbie Robinson, former commander of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base right here, and you were the commander during Dayton Peace Accords.
Correct, yeah.
So the most critical moment in this town, on the global stage, and also on a critical moment of the transatlantic history. To my left, Colonel Joseph Zies,
right.
Who is the Aerospace and Defense Advisor to Governor Mike DeWine here in Ohio. Both of the colonels on our panel have experience also of service in England, and therefore the experience of transatlantic defense partnership is not only one in each home country, but again, about the broader piece. So not from me, but I'll go to our furthest guest and our newest NATO member. Major, how do you consider the importance of service and how you see NATO and its potential and importance for Finland, for all of the NATO allies? And how does Finland see this perhaps in a way that is different from how the older allies might see it?
Yes, thank you very much and hyvää huomenta. That's good morning in Finnish. And I would also like to bring you greetings from the happiest country in the whole world. I know that it's hard when you are looking at me, but really, 8th year in a row, we are the happiest country in the whole world, but we are also the most coffee drinkers in the whole world. So there might be a connection. So very nice to be here, and this is very important topic what we are discussing here. And also, I must say first that we have to maybe a little bit understand the cultural differences what we have between Finland, United States, and all the NATO members. Like we are at the moment in the NATO meeting, 32 NATO countries. They share the same values, same goals pretty much, but they have different kind of cultural differences. And I think that is obvious, and we have to take that into consideration. And coming back to your question, one of the most repeated sentence in Finnish security policy after NATO membership has been that we are not anymore alone. And that is a huge issue for us. We have been fighting for many wars against Russia in order to maintain our independence in Finland. And in our culture, without overemphasizing, I would say that security, military service, taking care of our security and safety in Finland, that is in our DNA. So for example, every Finnish man has to go to army at least for 6 months, usually 11 or 12 months. And nowadays we are more and more discussing about the role of the women as well. Not maybe the compulsory military service, but a different kind of society service in the sense of security. So for us, these 2 years, 1 month, 3 days, what we have been in NATO member has been very, very important. And I would say honestly that like an integration phase to NATO is still going on, practically, but I would say especially mentally, because this is so huge mental change for our security thinking, defense thinking. Of course, we still think that the national defense and keep up that in a very strong sense, referring to NATO's Article 3 is the most important. But nowadays, when we have trusted allies, like-minded allies, that's a huge change for us. But still, I would say that we are still a bit learning. We are still a little bit learning that.
Thank you. Colonel Robinson, how do you see that? Is that this link between service and understanding what NATO is all about? Is this an important connection for you?
Well, to me, it's the only connection that matters. To be honest, when I started my Air Force career as a fighter pilot at RAF Lakenheath, England, I was checking out in the F-111, and before I could become mission ready, I had to get before a panel of officers. It's kind of like getting your PhD thesis, asking you questions, what about this, what about that? For whatever reason, our Deputy Commander for Operations invited senior NATO officers to sit in the panel and ask me questions. So right from day one, I've been involved with NATO, and it was the total focus of our mission at the 48th TAC Fighter Wing at Lakenheath, England, was around NATO and being a key part of NATO. It involved everything we did. All our missions, when you think about it, we were not going to be going alone. The United States was not going to fight this war by ourselves. It was always a teamwork activity. And so we were always flying missions where we would take off and we would go other places, and then we'd try to land in another country. So we'd help them with their interoperability education on how to refuel us. And because the 111 had such long legs where we could fly very long missions, deep strike, interdiction type missions, most times our plan was we were going to take off from England, we were going to fly our sorties, and then we were going to recover in one of the other NATO countries, and then get refueled, perhaps get rearmed, and then fly another mission. So the concept of the U.S. doing it by itself, I mean, that is a total alien concept to me. I can't think of where the United States would ever get involved in going to war by themselves. It is always going to be through teamwork, alliances with other countries where we're going to be doing. And of course, the whole aspect of NATO is not offensive. I think we all know that. It's always defensive. Okay? We do not see ourselves as the bad guys in this whole arena. So everything we did revolved around, let's focus on what we can do to be good team members with the other countries that are part of NATO. Whether it was reforger exercises, I mean, we were constantly exercising. It was nonstop. Reforger exercises, display determination, where we'd go down to Italy and fly out of Italy for 3 weeks at a time, flying with Italians, flying with other countries, as well as teaming with U.S. forces. So my mindset, I guess, because I was a young fighter pilot at the time, was always around, we're not going to do this by ourselves. It's always going to be teamwork, and we're always going to be using our allies, and we're going to leverage off of the strengths that other countries bring to the table as well. So that's how I see this whole question of, is there another question that's even legitimate to talk about, other than that we as a country today, if we ever decide that we have to go to war. And let me just, in that whole question there of war, and it's a terrible subject, and we clearly do not want to ever go to war if absolutely necessary. The former Secretary General of NATO said that it is exceedingly more expensive to fight and win a war than it is to prevent a war. And my first corollary to that is that it is exceedingly easier to start a war than it is to end a war. And I think we're seeing that today in Ukraine, where they thought, okay, this is going to be just a couple of weeks. How did that turn out? Here we are 30 years later. Other places around the world where we've seen the same thing, where it's very easy to get into wars if you do not have the strength, if you do not have the teamwork. When you have that strength, then all things are possible. Without it, it's a lot more difficult. And ending a war after you start, I think, is almost impossible if you don't have the right teamwork and the right people who are able to work with you to resolve the differences that caused the conflict to begin with, to at least a degree where people can at least agree to disagree without getting involved with killing each other. And so that's how I see it.
And when you think about that time flying, do you think that the adversaries were paying attention to
absolutely.
where you guys were and who was with you?
I mean, without a doubt, they were constantly tracking and monitoring what we were doing, trying to steal our secrets. I mean, you look at some of the aircraft that we were developing. After the Vietnam War, we learned our lesson about trying to fight the last war, and so we started to think forward. So some of the aircraft like F-16s, F-15s that we were designing and developing, and that after my tour at Lake and Heath, I became a test pilot and was actually testing those aircraft. And my focus was on how these aircraft would be operational in Europe and in a NATO fight. But if you look at the aircraft that the Soviet Union tried to bring on, they were copycats many times of what we had, because they were trying to reach parity with us. I don't think they ever did. I was able to fly a MiG-29 one year when I went to Poland. They asked me to come over when they were first getting ready to join NATO, in fact, and they had always been issued their aircraft by the Soviet Union. And so now here they were with outside the Soviet influence, and they had to figure out how they were going to buy their own aircraft, and they didn't know. And so, for whatever reason, they asked me to come over there and give them a briefing. So I went over with a couple of guys. Jimmy Doolittle III, you may have heard of him. He was one of my teammates. We went over there and spent about a week talking with their senior leadership on how the United States goes about the whole acquisition process. because it was alien to them, and they subsequently became members of NATO, and one of the aircraft that they originally were not going to get, but ended up buying, was the F-16. So it was a very interesting trip I had, I guess, to go over there and talk with Poland at that time.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Taking us from Cold War England into the NATO enlargement period, such a point of transformation and enlarging also the club of people who wanted nothing more than to be along America's side in something as powerful as NATO, to today. And so, Colonel Z, so to get to you, today your job is to shape policy, to advise policy here in Ohio. But based on your service, how do you bridge that service to today's policy in Ohio transformation?
Right. Well, let me leave you with 3 words to consider as we move forward. And I think really the first is partnership, commonality, and then demonstration of capability. But I want to go back really quickly to your point about, were they watching? Right? And Robbie and I were both at RAF Lakenheath. I arrived as Robbie was leaving. I was a Wizzo in the F-111.
Yeah, I'm the elder statesman here.
Yeah. No, and then we both went to Edwards. So our perspecti are similar, I think, in a lot of regards in terms of what shaped us in our military career and our post-military career. But you asked about, were they looking? When I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, I was a first classman. In 1981, had the privilege of marching in Ronald Reagan's inaugural parade. So we were practicing around the terrazzo at the Air Force Academy, getting ready to go out for the inaugural parade in D.C. Must have been a long day or whatever, as we were walking around and doing circles around the terrazzo. And we finished up, and at that time there was a senior enlisted advisor, a command master sergeant assigned each group, and he called us over. And he goes, "You got to get your act together. When you're walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, that's not just a parade, you're not just following a float. The adversary is watching you, and the adversary will make assessments and decisions based on how you look. Look the best you can be, because you will be sending a message to the Soviet Union." And that, obviously, it stuck to me clearly, because I still recall what the chief said. And that was the case, as Robbie mentioned, when I was overseas, right? That commonality, that partnership, that shared display of capability. They weren't just exercises. The Salty Nations, the display determination exercises, right? It wasn't just, hey, let's just make sure we can operate with our allies. It was to prove to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact at the time, here's the capabilities you will be up against should you be foolish enough to take an action. And so it was shared partnerships, commonality of systems. Oh yeah, we got the F-111 wing swept back into an F-104 shelter with about this much on each wingtip, right? But it was commonality of action, and it was risk, right? I mean, okay, be careful, I don't want to scrape this wingtip, but it was real risk. And it's probably reasonable on Memorial Day weekend to realize that not all casualties occur in a hot war. And that shaped my view of both service and warfare, modern warfare in the world, right? In April of 1983, I lost one of my closest friends from the academy when his F-111 went down off Borkum Island. And those are things that one remembers, and that shapes what I had done and how my service continued, but also in my latter service in flight test, as Robbie was. You know what? No surprises, right? They didn't trust their system. There was a problem with the system, and I want to make sure that the systems that air warriors get were the best possible. It shaped me fundamentally. And it shapes me to this day. as I serve with the governor. The goal is that, number one, in terms of policy, we support our military installations here. We support the service members, their families, and the veterans. You know, we have a lot of partners in that. John McCants, of course, is here. Employee support to Guard and Reserve. We support across the entire spectrum. But then also, Ohio is very much vested in the missions of our military organizations and the missions of our Ohio Guard and our industrial base, which is extensive. And so part of that is to ensure that that we are supporting Wright-Patterson's mission, for example, in security assistance, in technology development, those kind of things that really go to support our allies, and the industrial base here that's incredibly focused on our allies, on our NATO allies, which might be, and I think some of the delegates had a chance to go up and visit General Dynamics Land Systems up in Lima, but also our aerospace and defense systems here, the Air Force Security Assistance and Cooperation Center here, which is significant and clearly supports the NATO efforts. Because when we talk about now beyond just partnership, the commonality, that is so important. That is so important in being able to operate together as allies in a common goal and in a common effort. So between that and, of course, as we discussed, the demonstration of capability is incredibly important and really provides the deterrent effect to anyone who would be, again, so foolish as to create a military issue with that alliance.
Major Mill, you want to jump in on that?
Yes, just shortly. First of all, excellent comments, and now I understand why we say in Finland that the smartest officers goes to Air Force, the most handsome ones goes to Navy, and we rest go to infantry. But very shortly, continuing a little bit about what you were just saying, we had in Finland Memorial Day last weekend, and that is one of the most important days in Finland, and we can really sense the feeling that we are honoring the veterans. But maybe one point what I like to maybe bring from our point of view, what we are experiencing in Finland. Yes, I fully understand when we are talking about the war, we are usually thinking about the total war, like it is happening at the moment in Ukraine, and people are dying. And for example, during last 2 nights, Russia has been attacking Ukraine the fiercest way since the beginning of this full-scale war. Absolutely devastating. But then on the other hand, the situation where we are in Finland and in pretty many countries in Europe, I would recommend that we get rid of this dichotomy, peace or war, total war, total peace. Because for example, in Finland, we are not in either of those. We are somewhere between the war and peace at the moment. So for example, in the Russian strategic thinking, there are more than 70 different shades of gray between the war and peace. Yeah. And that is happening during the normal day, and that is called hybrid influence. Trying to confuse us, trying to unstabilize us in many, many different ways. And in that sense, yes, we still have that total war concept, and we have to be prepared for that for sure. But I would emphasize today also what is happening on daily basis, not in the front line, but in our societies. So for example, what we are paying more and more attention in Finland, and I know also in NATO, is for example this psychological warfare which is happening on daily basis. Especially through digitalization, utilizing AI, giving different kind of propaganda, what we are seeing from the Russia just recently, trying to confuse us, trying to get in our heads. And in that sense, I would say that everyone are in the first line of defense when we are talking about this like cognitive cybersecurity or psychological warfare, and that is very important. And what we are developing in this context very strongly in Finland, just as example, is the comprehensive security model, meaning that how you are able to engage the whole society to produce the security together, authorities together with the companies and enterprises, universities, education places, and even individuals. So creating the security together, but for us now it's comprehensive security 2.0 because we are in NATO. So developing security together also with the trusted allies, and that is something what is very, very important for us.
Yeah.
If I could follow up quickly on the question of, is the adversary watching? And is it watching the alliance at play right now? Do you get a sense, I mean, you've had comprehensive security and tremendous resilience for decades, but now, for a little over 2 years, you're a NATO member. So do you think the adversary is watching what this means? And do you think, as Colonel Aziz was talking about the effect of deterrence in particular, that this matters?
Well, actually the deterrence is the key word here, because of course we don't want anymore ever have the war, and that's why we are increasing the deterrence. And part of that is of course NATO, as we know, and the most important thing, Article 5. And of course, Russia, they have been telling us that before we joined NATO, that if you do that, there will be severe consequences of that. But no, there wasn't actually afterwards, so when we made this political decision. But nowadays, of course, what we have to pay, for example, and I would say all the NATO members more and more, one example attention is the cyber domain, and especially the cyber espionage, because we all know that more or less all the data, all the knowledge is in the digital form nowadays, and that kind of cyber espionage or cyber surveillance we most probably face more and more from the Russia, but also from China, because we are the NATO member nowadays.
I think it's really interesting, the two dimensions of both deterrence effect, this bigger comprehensive security that includes the other allies, but also different elements that are getting more complicated today.
Absolutely.
These new elements are elements of psychological warfare, comprehensive security, that affect the day-to-day lives here in Ohio, across the United States, and in every schoolyard with kids with smartphones in all of our allied nations. And yet I don't think that many of them are making the connection between what is being pushed on an addictive social media app in the schoolyard to the big geopolitical tension and this fight for freedom, peace, prosperity, and yet you have talked about how it is. And so in this conversation about hearts and minds and the younger generation, Colonel Robinson, how would you talk about what NATO is about? What is defense about?
That's a great question. And when I was asked to come up here and talk on this panel, I knew that question may come up, and I've struggled because how do you talk to a generation where to them ancient history is anything before they were born? And I mean, it is a well-known fact that the United States just does not have any culture where we honor history at all. And so I hearken back. Actually, yesterday, I was at the Air Force Museum, and I was looking at the section where there is the Berlin Wall, and I was just looking at it, and I was reading the panels and all, and I was looking at the plane right next to it. One of the F-111s that I flew at Lake and Heath is now in the museum, so what does that tell you, when you got an airplane that's in the museum? But as I'm standing there, this young lady comes up, and she has two small children with her, and they're looking at the Berlin Wall. And the Berlin Wall and had a mannequin or supposedly a person standing on top of the Berlin Wall. And anybody who was alive when the Berlin Wall came down or have seen pictures, you know that there were people standing on Berlin Wall and all that. And so this little kid says, "Mom, why is that person standing on that wall?" And the mother didn't have an answer. And the other little girl, the two little girls, they did not understand what the Berlin Wall was even about and why there would be somebody standing on the wall itself. And then she said something about, well, the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, it's time to leave, and off they went. And I thought about that little scenario, and this morning it occurred to me how you answer that. And everybody understands the concept of bullies. We all understand bullies, okay? And that wall was a bully tactic, okay? Now, one of the things, my wife could answer this question, because when we were at Lake and Heath, we had an opportunity to go into East Berlin, and we flew into Rhein-Main, and we took a troop train. It was just like out of a movie from Von Ryan's Express or something, where we got to the border, and it was the middle of the night, and oh, by the way, all the men were in one train car, and the women were in another train car. They insisted on that. But we get to the border, and here is middle of the night, and floodlights come on, and it's panning the train up and down. And as we're looking out the window, you can see that there are troops walking up and down the train with guard dogs, and they got their machine guns. And then they have people that get onto the train, and they're walking down, and it's just like you see in the movies, show me your papers. And so we had to show them our passports and all that. Okay, and it was a very tense situation there. And they told us beforehand that this was going to happen. They said, do not cause any problems, do not give these people a hard time, just show them your paperwork and let them then get on with it. So we did, okay, and we finally, the train ended up going into Tempelhof, and we were able to go through Checkpoint Charlie. And we saw where the tower is, where the guards are. And we see, it's actually, Berlin Wall was two walls. You had the West Berlin side and the East Berlin side, and then you had the killing strips between it, okay, where they actually killed people. I mean, this is fact, okay? And you could cut it with a knife, the difference between the feeling of being in West Berlin and then going over to East Berlin and seeing what it was like living under the communist state there. I mean, literally, it was just, Joe did the same thing, so I hope I'm not stealing his thunder on this part, but since I went first, and because I got there first, right, I was there years before he got there. But the whole concept of that Berlin Wall and why it was built, okay, and in fact, one night I was in a bar, as a fighter pilot might tend to do on occasion, and I was in there, and this elderly German comes in, and he asked the he didn't speak any English, and he asked the bartender, he says, who's this guy, you know, and because I was speaking English, so he's, what's he doing in here? And the bartender told him that I was a NATO pilot and that I was there. And he told that bartender, tell him to stay here, and he left. And he came back with a Stuka dive bomber model, and he wanted to give it to me. And I said, oh, thank you very much, but no, I can't. No, he insisted. And I said, why do you want to do that? And he says, because you are a NATO pilot, and you are standing up to the Soviet Union, and you are making a difference. He said, and I hope that by the time my grandchildren are my age, that I can walk in freedom, not only in Berlin, but across all of Germany. That was his mindset, that Berlin Wall was going to stay there for possibly generations. Now, that was in 1982, and thank God in 1989 we started to have that Berlin Wall come down. Okay, and so I'm hoping that gentleman had an opportunity that not only his generation, but his children and his grandchildren were in fact able to walk in freedom. And he wanted to thank NATO because we were the people who were standing up to the tyranny of the Soviet Union at that time. And I don't know how you tell that to little children other than boil it down to you have bullies, and there have always been bullies, and there always will be bullies, and it takes people like NATO to stand up and say, not today, not tomorrow. And so going to his point, we don't want war, and the way you prevent the war is you're always stronger than they are, and you always make the calculus such that we will win, they will lose. And again, I don't know how you tell a little kid that other than the bully tactic, but here, seeing those children, ask about why were they on, and to me it was because they were celebrating the bullies were gone. Yeah. That was what the fall of the Berlin Wall was. That was the bullies are gone. And so I guess I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. The moment of celebration and
Yes.
the moments of success. I feel like we get very down on the things that aren't going right.
Yeah.
But there have been many things over the past century that also have gone very right.
Very right.
So how do we get to that very right and keep the very right going on when it's stormier seas right now? And adversaries are feeling more emboldened than they have. But I'll turn, you can think about that. But I can turn to Colonel Zeiss about the question of how do you communicate and how this state, which is so crucial for not only America's defense, but also that of the entire alliance, how do you communicate how essential this is?
We continue to push forward that message again and again and again. It's important that that knowledge be out there, because that knowledge, Christine, that's the antidote to what you read on social media and things like that. But to make folks understand the criticality of both the defense and the industrial base installations that are Ohio, not just to the nation, but to the world, and how that technology and the birth of those technologies really can transcend and protect and improve the lives of the world. So you have to keep pushing that message, right? That the goal of Ohio is to stay on the leading edge of aerospace, of defense. And Ohio is the #1 supplier to Boeing, to Airbus, the corporate headquarters of, and you can name through each one of those. And the industrial relationships of, for example, CFM, the longest running industrial partnership in the world between General Electric Aerospace and Safran, right? That these type of alliances, if you will, with a little a, are so critical to the defense industrial base and the military capabilities of our alliances that really provide the power behind the messaging, which is important. But there's one other aspect I think that's critical, and I'll just add on to a couple of those points that Robbie made. And I think the other piece that that transcends the social media issues that we see is the interpersonal relationships. It's kind of like Robbie was referring to your acquaintance in the bar, right?
Yeah.
And I found it very, very interesting to be able to relate these kind of experiences in a one-on-one basis, because those interpersonal relationships then turn into international relationships. That's why an event like this is so important in terms of dialogue between our NATO partners and our humble experiences, right? But these kind of relationships matter, and they transcend and expand from interpersonal to international, and that's so critical. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. To follow in on the Berlin example, we went there, and you went there actually to exercise freedom of the city of the four powers from post-World War II. So it was the right of an American military officer in full uniform to walk through East Berlin at will. And so two of us walked through, and I remember walking through Alexanderplatz, and two Soviet officers are walking right by us. I mean, from me to Yarma, right? And it's like, this is surreal. No, this is real. Yeah. And to be able to explain that. When I was at Lakenheath, and Christine, you're a University of Cambridge graduate, we lived in a little place called 6 Mile Bottom in Suffolk, beautiful part of England. Our next door neighbor was a World War II Spitfire pilot. There was a bond there. There was an immediate bond. And it was like, as Robbie's saying in the F1, we would go to German bases, Italian bases, Turkish bases, and those individual bonds transcended then into international bonds as time went on. And that becomes very important. The younger generation is incredibly important. Our daughter lives in Copenhagen, as you and I were talking about. and wonderful city. The Nordic countries are so, so wonderful. Chance to travel all over Europe. She went to Prague. I said, wow, you went to Prague. She said, Dad, you never been there? When I was in Europe, when I was in Europe, that was beyond the line. That was beyond the inter-German border and the Warsaw Pact. Never been there. It was the most beautiful city, most wonderful, wonderful city. I went to the Museum of Communism. It was an incredible museum. So to Robbie's point about how do you explain, she goes, and this is without input from me and my experiences, she goes, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, she grew up and she grew up as an Air Force child and understood those things. She goes, the museum was extraordinary and so scary because it went from the ideal to the reality. To the reality that the defensive systems in the Berlin killing zone were not faced outward, they were faced inward. And to recognize that and understand that and understand the realities of that. That's how I think the younger generation, right, can transcend the social media, and it's with those personal relationships and interactions that matter so much. And so getting the message across, both in a personal sense, in an industrial sense, is absolutely important and critical. And as we go forward as a state that is so, so important and so valuable, like I said, not only to our nation, in aerospace, in space, in defense, it's understanding what those capabilities that we are pushing forward are, and making sure that we stay on the leading edge, that folks understand how important that is in the strategic picture of not only Ohio, but the United States and our allies, Christine. So that's how I think you get by some of the social media challenges, right?
It's human.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
It is. It's this.
Yeah.
It's this.
That is extremely important what you just said, and I fully agree the role of the communications nowadays. Because if we don't tell our story, our narrative, someone else will do that. And for example, I have also academic background. I was 9 years as a professor of cybersecurity, and I have been dealing with these issues pretty much. And I see that the biggest enemy doesn't come outside of NATO. It comes inside of NATO. Yeah. That we are getting like a polarization in our societies. We are not feeling in the same way. We are not defending same values inside NATO or in our national countries. And that is something what especially through this hybrid influence, the enemies are trying to do, making us to go towards each other. And I really have to say also that when I was yesterday evening, I was a little bit tired. I was in my hotel room watching the ice hockey game, Florida Panthers, and no, it was the other one, NHL game. What always, when I come to your country and seeing ice hockey, which is the #1 sport in my country, what I'm seeing is that before the game starts, there is a veteran, usually, and everybody is raising up, and there is this speaker who is saying that thank you very much for your service. Yes. And I think that is one excellent example how to communicate, how to keep up this kind of honor in our societies. Because what I was educated in military academy in Finland, that lasts 4 years, and then you graduate to be an officer in Finland. I think the most important learning what I got there was the saying that the spirit is always stronger than sword. And taking care of this spirit or will to defend your country is the baseline also, for example, in my country, Finland. The most important thing what we are measuring many times in Finland, that how we are able to maintain the strong spirit and will among our people that they will defend our country. And that is the most important in this sense. And that also brings me a little bit to the other point, what I wanted to mention here. I fully agree, standing up to tyranny, and that is something what we have to do on daily basis, not decades ago, but today. Because as we know, the Western values like freedom, democracy, they are really being challenged in today's world. And if we don't stood up against that, there will be not so good future for example, my 3 kids. But in security, I would also like to emphasize one very key trend in what will become, if you ask me, even more important, and that is the individual's responsibility. So when we are talking about the social media, and of course when we are talking about the humans, we are talking about also feelings. And according to the researches, the most important thing what is affecting to all of us, for example, how secure we feel today, it's not about what is happening in Ukraine, not what our governments are making strategic guidelines. It is what is happening on our daily lives, daily meetings. What kind of feeling I get from this guy just next to me? Is he polite? What kind of sense I get from him? And that is one key trend what we like to emphasize in Finland at the moment a lot, and that is actually the most important thing in our recent updated the security strategy of our society, that key players in security are every individual. So security is also a right, but it is also a responsibility which needs right kind of attitude.
Could I add on
Yes.
just real
Yes,
quick, Christine?
and I'll let you do. Yep.
Yeah, just real quick, to exactly what Jorma said. The government made a commitment 6 years ago when we took office. That is, Ohio will be the most military-friendly state in the nation to our military and our veterans. And we've instituted hometown heroes, which is exactly what you're talking about, right? And that's where at sporting events, at artistic events and things like that, you take it, show the rest of the population, right? The veterans, the military members, how important their service is. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to show the military and the veterans to society, but it transcends that as well, right? Because that allows the introduction of discussion of what they did, what they have done, what their mission is, what their role is, and it's a larger impact than just assisting and our military and our veterans and supporting them, but also engaging a dialogue that what they have done and what they continue to do is so important.
Anything to add on?
Yeah. Well, I'm just fascinated what Jarno was saying because, he talked about how it's a daily activity from the cyber world and just, he's right. Finland is right there, right next to Russia. I can't imagine every day waking up and having to deal with what you have to deal with in Finland. And so my hat is off to you, and I am so glad to see a country like Finland join NATO. When you think back to NATO, again, started with 12 countries and has grown to 32 countries, and some of those 32 countries are former Warsaw Pact allies of Russia who have decided the way that Russia is going is not the right way, and that they have decided to join NATO themselves. Whether you're talking about Bulgaria, Romania, Czech Republic, Poland, etc., okay? That should tell you something right there as far as are we in the right or are they in the right. It is clearly a different world we live in today than when Joe and I were sitting alert at Lake and Heath, England back in the 70s and 80s. But it's a more complex world, and it takes a different solution set than I think in some cases than what we had. And so it is clearly nonstop because the ability to just distract people in a different direction and give a different narrative, and people hear things. I heard a joke that says, well, what Abraham Lincoln said is you can't trust, what you read on the internet. That right there should tell you something, right? And somebody probably thinks, oh yeah, Abraham Lincoln actually was on the internet. But, and that's part of, unfortunately, our education system, I think, is part of the problem as well in that regard. But overall, I think things like this, what we're doing today, I think the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and their continuing activities to keep the word out there and keep the message out there is indeed an important part of it as well. I mean, as we've all said, this is not a one and done. You just can't say one time, look, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, trust us, and let's get on with it. It is every day that you have to wake up and you say, we've got to tell those guys, part of our responsibility is, again, that when they wake up, they look at us and they say, nope, not today. We know it's in the long term. When I was a test pilot, an engineer came up to me and he says, rust never sleeps. Rust never sleeps. Well, I think the same thing is true of the former Soviet Union, Russia, and their ambitions of where they want to go, and what you hear even out of Putin's mouth, and his rationale for the things that he has done in the past and things he wants to do in the future. That should let us know every day that we have to do what we need to do to make sure he does not win and he does not achieve his objectives. And whether we do it by, again, being strong deterrence, and we do it through teamwork, I think that is clearly the way we need to continue going in the future. And so I really applaud what the NATO Parliamentary Assembly is doing in this regard.
I'm sure that you all have questions or ideas that you want to tease out. So we are moving on to the part of the panel where we can engage you. But I think these questions, and so raise your hands high, and someone will bring around a mic.
People actually have their hands up.
Many hands up. Actually, a lot of hands up. How do we make sure to be vigilant together? And it's not just about one side or the other, or security in one state or one country, but really about the world together that I think is so impressive here at the Parliamentary Assembly. Yes. And to be here in Ohio, in a state that is so committed to defense and to military service and to veterans, which is such a wonderful example. But we'll take the first question right here, and maybe we'll take 3, because we have a lot. So is that okay? And please introduce yourself to the panel.
Excellent. Hello. My name is Destiny Johnson. I'm a resident here in Dayton, Ohio. And my question for you all today is, do you worry that social media is too far gone to control the spreading of misinformation and propaganda?
Thank you. One more. There are a few in this area.
Good morning. Thank you all first for being here. My name is Lisa Lemaster, retired after 40 years of service at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base civilian. And my question actually is for Finland. How has your defense strategy changed since you became part of NATO? Do you now look at NATO countries as an extension of your defense forces, or do you wait until that may be an issue for you and then include NATO in those plans? And secondly, my question was, why do all countries not want to join NATO? Right. And it sounds like a great deal to me, right? And who makes those final decisions? Is it a mandatory vote or a percentage vote on whether or not a country can come into NATO?
Thank you so much. We'll take one more. So right there, and we'll go to the other side of the room for the next batch. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Eva Kokenauer. I live here in Dayton. My father was a veteran, so I applaud you for your service. Thank you. My question might be a statement, but I heard one of the gentlemen say that these parades are a show of force, and I think many Americans are concerned about the large parade coming up in January, or in June, the 14th. Should we see that as a show of force, or a show of media popularity?
All right, we'll take them there. There were many. Start with Major Limnall and move over for the Finland questions being, of course, the most relevant in social media.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent questions. I fully agree that we don't actually understand the importance of the more and more spreading dis and misinformation at the moment. I am also in the World Economic Forum, in the Security Expert Network, and there we create once a year, annually, this Global Risks Report, where we evaluate in the short term and longer term what are the most important risks that we are facing, what are destabilizing the whole world. At the moment, we evaluate that spreading mis- and disinformation, especially interfering elections and utilizing AI, is the most severe threat to our democracies, to our world at the moment. And as we all know, for example, the development of the AI is going faster and faster, and it's pretty tough to understand, even as an expert, what is real and what is not in the internet. And now it's not anymore that someone is massively sending the same message, videos, texts, voices, but now utilizing the AI, you can really put the cat videos, what you like, what are raising your emotions, and dog videos for him. So this is getting very fast, and I think this is something what we really have to tackle more importantly. And I personally believe, and this is just my opinion, that when we have in NATO at the moment 5 official warfare domains, land, sea, airspace, and cyber, and this cyber is more and more technical cyber, by the end of this decade we will have the 6th domain, and that will be I don't know how to call it, but like a psychological part of the warfare or cognitive cybersecurity or that. So that is really something what we should pay attention. Then excellent question concerning about how this has changed Finland, NATO membership. First of all, in a very concrete way, when we used to, a little bit simplifying now, when we used to look at the map when we were planning our defense, we were just watching Finland. Maybe a little bit the Sweden and Baltics and Norway and the Scandinavia. But nowadays, when we are thinking about the defense, we are thinking about whole area of NATO countries. And that is a huge difference. Of course, we need bigger maps now. That's one point. But that's a huge difference in your mentality when we have been thinking for more than 100 years that, okay, it's just us, and we actually can't rely any others. We have to take care of our security by ourselves. So that's why this mental change, what I was referring earlier, that we are not anymore alone. That probably you Americans, sorry to say this, you can't understand how big change this is for us. That we are, for example, nowadays having not only NATO membership, but also, for example, this DCA agreement with your country. We have also have the bilateral agreements in cybersecurity, information influencing with your country. And those are huge issues for us in a concrete way, but especially in the mental way, not only the politicians and officers, but for the whole, everyone in Finland understanding that we are not anymore alone, and that is huge difference. And I think we are still a little bit learning that.
And of course, the US and other allies benefit from your experience. So you were alone for such a very long time, but have incredibly robust and innovative approaches for defense because you were alone for such a long time. And so from, for example, in Arctic training and how to operate in the high north, and this is ever more an area that is a worry, you host and bring in allies to teach them what you guys are doing too. So again, the NATO piece, it's not simply a one-way street.
Absolutely, and I am sure, of course, we Finns, we are modest. This is tough for me, but I hope that we are also able to not consume security, but produce security, making NATO stronger. And I think this comprehensive security model is something what the other NATO countries in our NATO hybrid strategy, which will be stabilized in the Hague top meeting, NATO top meeting next month. That is something, as one example, what we can produce to others. And of course, during the peacetime, because of the Russia, the long common border with the Russia, we didn't get rid of our defense capability. So I would say, even as a Finn, our armed forces is one of the strongest ones in whole Europe. So for example, at the moment we have the biggest artillery in the whole Europe at the moment. Soon we will have 1 million men in reserve. And when you are thinking about that Finland consists of 5.5 million people, 1 million reservists, that's pretty big number, and the will is very high. And also I would especially mention some technology areas where I see that we can really provide new innovatives, new solutions to the other allies in NATO, is especially quantum technologies, next generation telecommunications, and airspace, air defense.
Thank you so much. Parades.
Oh, sure. So, ma'am, in the context of the Cold War in 1981 was my comment. And so I'll give you an additional anecdote to my point. My point was that the Soviet Union were looking at us. They were looking at the quality of the cadets at the Air Force Academy. What is going to be the future Air Force officers? What do they look like, right? And the venue was President Reagan's inauguration. And how did we appear, right? And the Chief Master Sergeant goes, "You guys don't look good. You didn't look good," and people are watching. And it matters that you look good, that you project the discipline of a military organization. And here's the other anecdote I'll give you. To the Berlin anecdote, we've talked a lot about our experiences in Berlin during the Cold War times, during the separated times. And I don't know, Robbie, if you went there, but part of the route we would take us by the Soviet War Memorial in East Berlin, guarded by Soviet troops. And invariably, you'd get there at about the time of the change of command, and change of the guard, and you'd watch them, and you'd watch out. And there was a ongoing show where, as the last couple of Soviet soldiers would march off, they'd turn around and wave at you in one of their most solemn locations. And what did that kind of tell you? How did that inform you about the Soviet armed forces at the time? So it was more of an individual kind of comment in terms of that, but that gave me, as an observer, an idea of the Soviet soldier of the time, their commitment and their discipline. And it was the same, I think, as I described the inaugural parade and the Chief Master Sergeant. You all don't look professional. You all don't look good. And we did then, when the time came. Oh my gosh, yeah, that really ignited the fire. But that was my point. Vis-a-vis show of force, no. In terms of discipline, in terms of character, in terms of show of what you would expect of an officer. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Sure.
Colonel Robinson, on that, or on the question of how a country joins NATO, and can anyone join? Because we could also divvy that up.
He brought up a point about marching in a parade. Because I'm a few years older than him, I had an opportunity to do that too. In 1968, Our squadron got selected to march in the parade when President Richard Nixon was first inaugurated. And I've got to say, our concern was not whether we were going to look good as marching. We won the drill competition at the Academy, so that's why they selected us to go there. Our concern was actually whether our fellow American citizens were going to attack us as we were marching down the street. And so, to me, it is highly interesting how we have gone from where my first year at the Air Force Academy, and we were concerned whether we were going to be attacked by our fellow citizens, to today, people, thank you for your service. So I don't know what happened in the process between those two time periods, but I'm much more feel at home or feel more welcome in society today than I certainly did wearing a uniform back in 1968. With regard to this, let me deal with, there's four elements of national power. There's the political, there's the military, there's the economic, and then there's this other thing called psychosocial. And a lot of people don't understand psychosocial, but it is a very powerful aspect of your nation's power projection. And I think that the Russians are doing a very good job in the psychosocial arena, because they don't have the ability within the military and economic, but they are certainly leveraging the psychosocial, and we have got to get up to speed on that ourselves. And so to the question about social media and all that, do I have a problem with social media? I think everybody will know, okay, you look at some sites and say, that's just incorrect, that's just wrong, that's bad stuff. But the good news is you can go to other sites and you can, in fact, get the news. In fact, I do today. I mean, I've got to say, being a military officer, and I could talk for hours on this subject about the relationship between the military and our press. It's never been good. And they've never told the correct story in my mind. So I don't look at mainstream media as much as I used to in the past, and I do look at other sources for where I get my information today. And the other question, I'm sorry, was...
So how does a country get into NATO?
Oh, the NATO thing, yeah. Now, of course, I'm not an expert on actually getting into NATO, but as I understand the issue, in when Finland and Sweden came in, they have to apply, and they have to meet certain criteria. And I think that it's 100%. Every other member
100%.
of NATO has to agree, and that was part of the problem with Sweden, was that Turkey was objecting and holding out and voting them in until they got concessions for whatever political things that they had heartburn with Sweden over. But that's how you do it. Now the question of why everybody isn't. That's an interesting issue as well. Several years ago, does everybody remember when Russia applied to join NATO? They did. Russia actually applied for NATO. And of course, then the question was, well, if Russia joins NATO, why even have NATO anymore, right? What's the point? It kind of goes away. But the fact that they were talking about, well, yeah, let us in, let us be part of NATO also. I mean, what kind of thinking is that, right? But they were serious about it. And so I think that the fact that we didn't let them in was obviously a good thing. I applaud the rest of NATO countries for not doing that. If that had happened, I mean, it'd been over. I mean, NATO would, and then they could go do their own thing. And so the fact that I think that's a good thing. I would like to see considerably more countries part of NATO, though. There's one in particular, I think, that we can all, maybe perhaps whisper about. But ultimately, I think they do need to be. I'll go on record and say I do think eventually they should be part of NATO. I think that the alliance that we have is clearly, it's defensive, and I think it has been in every country's best interest to be part of NATO. No country has joined NATO and then backed out. That's the first thing. No country has ever been attacked after being part of NATO by any other country.
The United States on 9/11.
Well, except, okay, other country, I'm talking, not the United States, and the 9/11 thing was certainly a tragedy, but I'm talking about countries like Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, France, Germany. Have they ever been attacked since they've been part of NATO? Not at all. No. So does it work? Absolutely it works. Will it work in the future? only if we let it work. Okay? That's how I'll answer that question.
If
Thank
I
you.
may add very shortly, the plan was originally that Finland and Sweden, we go together to NATO. But as you very well mentioned, all the other members have to accept the members.
Yes.
And there were 1 or 2 countries from Europe which didn't accept in the first place Sweden's membership. So that's why we came first. What we are proud of, and we keep reminding Swedish people always. Because we have this love and hate between Finland and Sweden all the time. We beat them in the ice hockey, NATO membership, everything.
There you go.
But then the other point what I would like to add is that, for example, here in Dayton today, in the NATO PA meeting, it's not only 32 NATO country representatives, they are also the partner countries. Like I was meeting yesterday South Korean delegation, and we are thinking about security cooperation. People from Australia, New Zealand, and many, many others. And I am sure that when you are reading next month the referendum from the Hague top meeting, it will emphasize even more that these partners, not only members, but partners also are more and more important for NATO. So this is a big alliance, members and partners, like Finland used to be this partner for decades, but now we are in the inner circle.
Thank you. Grab some questions from here and we'll do a round, so if you could take.
Thank you very much, Christina. My name is Edward Joseph from Johns Hopkins SAIS, Army veteran, also former Army aviator, UH-1 pilot,
Wow.
who deployed in Bosnia-Herzegovina with NATO, with I-4, shortly after the signing of the Dayton Agreement. And just following on about these comments about Russia, as incredible as it sounds, Russia was a valued partner in the NATO implementation force in Bosnia-Herzegovina and later in Kosovo with KFOR. So things have changed, and as it happens, it was really Russia that we should be very clear for the good folks here in Dayton. It was Russia that broke off this relationship with NATO, the NATO-Russia Council. Christina, you know this, the last meeting of the NATO-Russia Council, January 2022, 1 month before the invasion, and obviously you know this, and the real problem with Russia is not that NATO doesn't want to have good relations and potentially even membership, it's that Russia insists, and Major Limnell, you know this extremely well, Russia insists on vetoing the sovereign right of Ukraine to join NATO, and this is really the clarity that we stand. But just if I could, to turn us back to the theme here, conversations about peace and security in the Balkans. Maybe Colonel Zeiss, perhaps could you tell us something about the Ohio National Guard and its relationship with Serbia, which is a long-standing relationship, and Serbia, a country that has its own conflicted relationship with Russia. The president recently, after being told by and cautioned as an EU candidate not to go, attended the 80th anniversary of the victory over Germany in World War II, went to Moscow and attended that. Sure. And I know Ohio National Guard has had this important relationship, and many in Belgrade appreciate that.
Yeah. Those guard relationships are really are very, very important, and it goes not only to military, right, but personal to personal. We talked about social media. We talk about the influence of cyber, things like that. And I truly believe that a guard relationship, right? An Ohio Guard. If you didn't know, the Ohio Guard is the 4th largest in the nation, 2nd largest air guard in the nation. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary in power. Matter of fact, Mansfield, the 179th Wing, is now the first cyber wing in the National Guard. So we go everywhere, everything from F-16s to cyber to refuelers to drones. So it's special ops in the Army Guard, all the way through to infantry brigades. It's fascinating the depth and breadth of the Ohio Guard UH-60s, actually, UH-60Ms, and heavy lift, of course, with the Chinooks. So the breadth of that Guard and the ability then to relate to a country like a Serbia, now the newest one in Africa as well, that they've just gotten approval, that stimulates those personal relationships aside from the organizational relationships, right? So whilst I can't speak to Serbia, I could speak certainly to the intent of the Guard and of General Harris as the Adjutant General of Ohio in exerting both those organizationally, but the personal relationships, and he will mention this, and I will mention the personal relationships that are developed in the military-to-military exchanges of the Guard relationships and of the country relationships with the Guard is extraordinary, because then that develops into stronger and more focused international relationships, or inter-nation relationships, really, right? And that's the beauty of that program. And that's why Ohio is so vested in those programs.
I know we have lots more interest, and we have no more time. So this has been a wonderful conversation. Maybe a single sentence wrap up from everyone here, and before we go, Major Limnell.
It's great to be ally with you.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Aziz?
Understanding that the Cold War and pseudo-war, those operations in between the spectrum, doesn't mean that service and sacrifice are required at all times. And that's especially important to remember on a Memorial Day weekend. It's not just hot war.
Colonel Robinson, final thoughts?
My final thoughts, well, it's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere, I guess, when you're my age, but it's good to be here, and it's great to be on the stage with these two gentlemen and be part of this forum today. Again, I think what I said earlier about, to me, it's definitely important that the NATO Parliamentary Assembly continue their activities to educate people. We were talking earlier about, the concern about, social media and other sites and all that. You get the education out there. Let people know the facts, okay? And then when they know the facts, then they can make the right decision, okay? Because I think reasonable people, when they get the facts, come to the same conclusions, okay? It's only when, people either don't have any facts, they're just going on what I think, or, what somebody told me, whatever, as opposed to true facts on the table. And so my hat's off to the Parliamentary Assembly and to your organization for being part of this today. I think this has been a wonderful little panel today. I'm glad to be part of it. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much for your thoughts, for your impressions, your experiences, your lived experience of what the Alliance really means today and what it's going to mean in the future. The German Marshall Fund is not only across Europe and in Washington, but also we have programming across the country. My team and I lead a project called Across America, where we have conversations exactly like this with Europeans and Americans, usually about security and defense and what partnership means all across this country. We hope to be back here in Dayton, and we certainly will be back across many states across the United States. So please be engaged. Please come with more questions, because the more we talk about this and the more we understand the human dimension of what an alliance means, the stronger we are and the stronger we will be. Thank you all so much for coming today, and thank you to the GMF team for putting it together.